Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. Seymour Hersh's claims about how Osama bin Laden was killed in 2011 have opened a Pandora's box of speculation. Was bin Laden in Pakistan's protective custody for 5 years before his death? If yes, why did Pakistan do this? And were Generals Kayani and Pasha, but also former President Zardari and former Prime Minister Gilani in the know and complicit in protecting bin Laden? With me to answer these questions is the former Chief Minister of Pakistan's Punjab province and the editor of the Friday Times, and a man who very definitely does have a very clear idea of the answers, Najam Sethi. Najam Sethi, before we come to details, let me start with a simple, straightforward question. You've read Seymour Hersh's account of how Osama bin Laden was killed. Do you find it credible?
Well, parts of it are credible, some parts of it are not. It doesn't help that he hasn't named credible sources.
But you say some parts of it are credible. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes.
Let's then come to details. Seymour Hersh claims that from 2006 to 2011, Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan's protective custody in Abbottabad. As a former Chief Minister of Punjab and as editor of the Friday Times, do you believe that Osama bin Laden for 5 years was in Pakistan's protective custody?
Well, you know, being an ex-caretaker chief minister doesn't have anything to do with it. It's my journalism that tells me that this is a broadly correct assessment.
Why do you say that?
Well, the thing is that the Americans say it, and now Hersh is saying it. The man was found there, and the Pakistani authorities have not given us a credible explanation of how he came to be in the backyard of a military academy.
So for all those reasons, you believe that what Hersh is saying when he claims that Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan's protective custody for 5 years, that is correct?
I think so.
How sure are you of this? Are you simply going by a hunch and a feeling, which is perfectly journalistically correct, or are you quite credibly sure?
No, I don't have any evidence for it myself, but it's, you know, it's circumstantial evidence. The fact that the Pakistanis have not denied that he was picked up from there, and that the Americans are saying he was there, and then now Hersh is saying the same thing.
All right. Now,
and it makes sense that if the Pakistanis had him there, then he was in protective custody, and they were hoping possibly to leverage him either with the Taliban or with the Americans in due course.
I'll come to that in a moment's time. But first, let's go back to Hersh's account. Hersh says that the Saudis knew that bin Laden was in Pakistan's protective custody, that they in fact were paying for him to be looked after. The funds were coming from the Saudis, and therefore they were quite obviously complicit in protecting bin Laden. Do you believe that part of the story?
No, I've never heard this before.
Not hearing it before, does that mean you don't believe it, or simply you can't verify it? Which of the two?
The thing is, obviously I can't verify it, but the fact is that his wives were transported from, one from Saudi Arabia and one from somewhere else, to Pakistan, and they came to live with him in this compound. But that's about all I can say.
But that would suggest that there was some level of Saudi complicity, or at least some level of Saudi involvement. Otherwise, the wives could not have come from Saudi Arabia to this compound.
Not necessarily. It could be the case, but not necessarily.
It could be the case. Now, Hersh also claims that before 2006, bin Laden lived undetected with his wives and children in the Hindu Kush mountains, and that the ISI got him by bribing local tribal people to betray him. Have you heard that before, and can you...
No, I've never heard that before. No.
So you can't verify it, or you don't believe it? Which of the two?
No, I don't believe it. I can't verify it. My sense is that that he was, you know, there's some evidence, a lot of people talking about the fact that he was first in Haripur and was in a safe house there, and from there he was moved to Abbottabad. So I imagine that the handlers were in charge. He wasn't well, and so he needed to be looked after, and probably gave himself up in some way or the other.
In fact, Hersh also claims that when the ISI took charge of him in 2006, he was unwell, and a Pakistani military doctor called Amir Aziz treated him. Does that link up with what you're saying, that he probably wasn't well and needed to be looked after?
Yeah, but I'm not sure about the role this so-called Amir Aziz is supposed to have played.
I mean, it could be some other doctor, not necessarily Amir Aziz.
I don't know about that.
Now, let's come to another very important part of Hersh's story. Hersh says that the CIA didn't discover bin Laden's whereabouts by tracking his courier. They did so because the senior Pakistani intelligence officer in 2010 August informed the CIA station chief in Islamabad in return for part of, or a sizable sum of 25 million, which was the reward. Do you believe that part of the story?
Karan, this is something that has been floating around from the very day that he was picked up. And a certain brigadier was named. But there's never been any further talk of that, especially since the Americans then let out a completely different story. But now I think there is a lot of credibility in this assertion. And a lot of people in Pakistan are saying this is probably true. One or two reporters have actually told me that they have reason to believe from their military sources, which of course are unnamed, that a certain Brigadier Khalid Usman was the man who walked in and was then eventually given asylum and given the reward money of 25 million.
Let me ask you, what do you, Najam Sethi, a credible editor, believe? That in fact the Americans were tipped off by a Pakistani security ISI official, possibly this Brigadier Khalid Usman? Do you believe that?
The thing is, we don't know whether this was an ISI official, a military intelligence official, or just a military official who had picked up this information. That's not clear.
But what you do believe is that a Pakistani official, be he ISI, military intelligence, or just pure army, did go to the CIA and did tip them off. That you do believe?
I think that's credible.
Now, in fact, Hersh goes one step further. He says Generals Kayani and Pasha were not kept in the dark, as the Americans at the time claimed, that in fact they cooperated with the Americans and the American plan to kill bin Laden after being offered financial and political inducements, including what Hersh calls under-the-table personal incentives. Do you believe that to be true?
No, I think this is the weakest part of Hersh's theory. It just does not make sense for the Pakistanis to be in the loop in this manner, because what happened before and what happened after this event suggests that there was a lot of distrust and tension between the two sides. Before, there was this Raymond Davis case and the whole question of doing more against the Haqqani network, which the Pakistani army was reluctant to do. And afterwards, you know, the Pakistani army cracked down on one of the doctors who was alleged to have been involved as a CIA agent, Dr. Shakil. Subsequently, if you remember, the Pakistanis took a very hard line, stopped all NATO supplies after the Salala incident. So there was a lot of bad blood between them, which is to suggest that they were not on the same page, and the Pakistanis resented the fact that the Americans had taken them for a ride.
Once again, is this your hunch and your assumption that Generals Kayani and Pasha were not in the loop, as Hersh claims that they weren't in fact helping? Or do you feel this is a fact that you can assert?
The point is, Karan, there are very few facts here. We are always speculating here. I mean, Hersh has not presented any facts. The Americans did not present any facts. The Pakistanis did not present any facts. The Abbottabad Commission report is yet to see the light of day.
Okay.
So we are speculating all the time here in terms of what is more credible and what is less credible.
That's perfectly accurate. If you then don't believe that Generals Kayani and Pasha cooperated with the Americans, does it follow that America didn't get the sort of help from the Pakistan Army and the Pakistan intelligence services that Seymour Hersh details? He's talking about things like confirmation of bin Laden's DNA, protection from Pakistani army and air defense during the mission, as well as little things like the ISI guards melting away, the electricity being cut off to provide cover of darkness, as well as perhaps critically an ISI official on board the helicopter to guide the SEALs. You don't believe any of that help could have been forthcoming?
No, I don't think so. I think all that is made up, is fictitious. It's part of it is the American fiction, because you know the American fiction says they also had a Pakistani on board, but they say he was brought in from the US in order to make sure that if there were any problems he could negotiate the troublemakers.
All right.
But I don't think the Pakistanis gave them any help at all. It would have required a Herculean effort involving not just the ISI, MI, but also the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Air Force Army Air Chief.
Let's then,
and so it was just not possible.
Let's then go back to the critical thing that you believe is credible and true. Journalistically, your hunch says this is the part of Seymour's story that you accept, that Pakistan for 5 years between 2006 and 2011 gave Osama bin Laden protection and kept him in their custody. Why would Pakistan do this?
Yes, well, I mean, I think Hersh has also speculated on this. And one can easily understand why this is the case. If you'll recall that 2005 General Musharraf was in charge, and he was constantly asked this question about where is Osama bin Laden, and he would say he's in Chitral or God knows where he is. We have heard rumors that he's not well and so on and so forth. But I think one of the reasons why this may have happened, when they got him, they wanted to keep him in protective custody rather than hand him over to the Americans. One reason may have been to keep the Americans engaged in the region, which meant that, you know, the aid pipelines were flowing and all the rest of it. The military assistance was coming. And the other might have been to use them as a leverage for the time when they might have had to compel the Haqqani network or Mullah Omar to sue for peace with Afghanistan as part of their assets.
In fact, Seymour Hersh...
So they were probably going to trade him in.
In fact, Seymour Hersh...
at the right time for the right price.
In fact, Seymour Hersh in his article quotes General Pasha to have told the Americans, and I'm quoting, the ISI was using bin Laden as leverage against Taliban and Al-Qaeda activities inside Afghanistan and Pakistan. They let the Taliban and Al-Qaeda leadership know that if they ran operations that clashed with the interests of the ISI, they would turn bin Laden over to America. In other words, he was leveraged not just vis-a-vis America, as you say, but also leveraged vis-a-vis Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and to ensure that Taliban and Al-Qaeda did Pakistan's bidding.
Well, that's what I'm saying, that, you know, Mullah Omar and the Taliban, he was going to be used as leverage for them as well. As you know, now that time for leveraging has come.
Absolutely, except that he's not there any longer. Now, let me ask you this.
Except that he's not there, yes.
Let me ask you this. In 2006, General Musharraf was both president and army chief. General Kayani was the head of the ISI. I take it therefore follows that both men knew that bin Laden was in Pakistan's protective custody. There's no way that they would have been unaware that this could have been handled at a lower level without them being knowledgeable of it.
It stands to reason that this happened during General Musharraf's watch. It could not have happened without his approval. And since General Kayani was ISI, the head of the ISI, and the earlier head of the ISI was, the later head of the ISI, after General Kayani, that too was a man close to General Musharraf.
So he too would have known?
I should think so.
That would be General Pasha, would it?
Well, there was another gentleman before General Pasha.
General Butt.
That was General Nadeem. Nadeem, as you know, had been the commander of Kakul at the time when bin Laden was supposed to be in Abbottabad.
So all these gentlemen...
it stands to reason that, if you link the dots together, it makes sense.
Now, Zardari became president in 2008. Gilani became prime minister in May, a little earlier, but also of 2008. After they became president and prime minister, would they have been in the loop, or would they have been kept in the dark?
I should think they were kept in the dark.
You're fairly sure of that?
Yeah, these are not matters that the military is ready to entrust to the care of civilians.
Let me ask you this. a man like bin Laden is a very important asset. To keep someone like him in protective custody means that a fair number of people would have been involved. How large would have been the circle that would have been in this secret in Pakistan? And then secondly,
well, my sense is...
Are you surprised this was kept a secret for 5 years? Answer the two together.
My sense is that, not more than 5 or 10 people can, not more than 5 or 6 people need be involved in bringing him into this house and leaving him there, and then 3 or 4 people in the loop making sure that nothing goes wrong. But the thing is that if the Pakistanis were in cahoots with the Americans on the raid, then of course dozens of people, including very high level people, would have been involved. And neither Kiani nor Pasha could have taken that sort of risk. So I don't buy that part of this Hersh's theory at all.
But do you find it surprising that the fact that bin Laden was in Pakistan's protective custody for 5 years remained a secret for so long? Do you find that surprising?
Yes and no. At one level, it's surprising, yes, that nobody, not even the Americans, couldn't sniff that out, with all their eavesdropping equipment and all the rest of it. And they were looking for him high and low all over the place. On the other hand, this was you couldn't have been more safe than in the backyard of the military.
In other words,
and the circumstances were such that he was kept in isolation, and the area was relatively clinically cleaned up.
Now, Pakistan appointed the Abbottabad Inquiry Commission under Justice Javed Iqbal. Its report has never been officially published, although Al Jazeera in 2013 published a draft of perhaps an earlier version of the final report. Do you believe the Inquiry Commission would have found out that Osama bin Laden for 5 years was in Pakistan's protective custody? Do you believe that unpublished final report has greater details?
I imagine that's the reason why it hasn't seen the light of day. It must be asking many embarrassing questions, and it probably did not receive credible answers from people in authority, especially in the military.
So one reason why the Abbottabad Inquiry Commission report has never been publicly released is because if it were to be, it would embarrassingly confirm this element of Hersh's story, that for 5 years Osama bin Laden was in Pakistan's protective custody.
Well, it might not confirm it, but it would certainly create more doubts about the official version.
How has this story been received by Pakistan public opinion? I'm talking specifically about the fact that Pakistan protected bin Laden, the world's most wanted terrorist, for 5 years. How has that been received by Pakistan public opinion?
Don't forget, bin Laden was a bit of a hero in Pakistan for fighting against America. So when this story originally broke, there were 2 or 3 obvious inferences which a majority of the population drew. One was that, yes, not at all a surprise that he was with us, that we were protecting him from the bad Americans. And 2, that yes, the Americans did a double cross on Pakistan when they did this raid, and that we were incompetent and we were caught with our pants down.
But are there people in Pakistan who are arguing that in fact it was right of Pakistan and correct of Pakistan to use bin Laden for realpolitik purposes? Or does the majority of public opinion say, no, this was immoral, it was wrong, you shouldn't protect the world's most wanted terrorist, a man who's responsible for the killing of 2,977 people on 9/11? Which way does the media, which way does public opinion swing between those two positions?
The media recognizes the fact that Al-Qaeda is the enemy, but that is now. Many years ago, they never thought of Al-Qaeda as the enemy, or indeed of the Taliban as the enemy. So there was so much anti-Americanism here. But now the paradigm has changed in this country with the arrival of the new army chief, and the fact that he's acting against the Taliban and against Al-Qaeda and against all religious extremists and sectarianists. So the narrative is changing in the right direction.
Tell me, you mentioned the new Army Chief General Raheel Sharif. What is the official response, or is there at all any official response from either General Raheel Sharif or Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif?
Well, that's the real million-dollar question. The thing is that unofficially the military and the government are saying that this is all nonsense. A part of them are saying some of it may be true. The Foreign Office has given a pretty wishy-washy statement, much like the Americans have given, both sides sticking to their original positions. But I think the fact that the Army Chief or the ISPR has not given a categorical statement clearing the air, that would suggest that, you know, the mortar is pretty muddy here.
But that would also suggest that your journalistic hunch, which you stand by, that in fact Pakistan protected bin Laden for 5 years and gave him protection and kept him in custody, is correct, and that the army and the government are embarrassed, and that's why they can't come out with a categorical answer.
Well, I don't know what is exactly going on, but clearly there are holes in Hersh's account. There are holes in the Pakistani government's and military's accounts, and there are holes in the Americans' account. The truth probably lies somewhere in between.
Finally, you've said that you personally believe and stand by the belief that Pakistan did give protective custody to bin Laden for 5 years. You also believe that a military or an ISI or an intelligence officer tipped off the Americans, which is how they discovered bin Laden was in Abbottabad, and not through tracking his couriers. Are you worried that having said this to an Indian channel, action could be taken against you?
Well, the thing is that I'm not saying anything extraordinary. This is the talk of the town, and it's a bit late in the day to try and cover the, to try and hide the truth. And the fact is that this new military leadership has disowned many of the actions of the past military leadership. And this military leadership is absolutely trying to change the old paradigms in which, intelligence agencies would play games,
okay,
and you would give succor to terrorists in order to leverage certain dimensions of foreign policy. All that is changing, and therefore, I think, we are on the right track.
My last question. What is the response from General Musharraf?
Silence. I think Musharraf will say he will deny the fact that, he was there during his term. But, the denial is not going to carry weight because it's going to be riddled with holes.
But at the moment you're saying he's officially silent. He hasn't said a word.
No, he's silent.
All right, Najam Sethi, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for coming on board and confirming your personal belief that, in fact, it is true when Seymour Hersh says that bin Laden was in Pakistan's protective custody for 5 years from 2006 to 2011, and also that you personally accept that part of the story where Hersh says that, in fact, a Pakistani official, be he ISI or army or military intelligence, tipped off the Americans. They didn't discover bin Laden's whereabouts by tracking his career. My thanks to you for speaking to us and confirming all of that. And there we end this particular episode. If you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.